Hello and welcome to the Barcast. I'm your host, Nick Barr, coming to you on a sunny and warm Wednesday afternoon in an undisclosed bunker in the deep south. So, new setup for me today. And I'm excited to round out the four with the self-preservation four. So today we'll be talking about the self-preservation four, and the key word for them is tenacidad, which we're going to provisionally translate as tenacity, although as we'll soon see, it's not as simple as we might like. So let's see what Naranjo has to say. Different from the sufferer, that's the social four, and the insufferable, that's the sexual four, is what in Spanish is called the stoic or enduring person, a term that speaks to us about a capacity for self-denial and endurance. Off the bat, I would imagine that Naranjo's using different words for endurance there. Que se llama... sufrido. Oh, okay. So I'll just eliminate or enduring person, just call the stoic. That's it's just trying to translate sufrido. Stoic, a term that speaks to us about a capacity for self-denial and endurance. Instead of being an overly tearful person, the stoic individual is one who doesn't complain and avoids crying in front of others. They've learned to swallow a lot and endure pain without flinching. How can we explain this in terms of motivation? What can drive a person to become masochistic? It's somewhat like telling a parent or a loved one, "See, I'm not complaining. Do you love me now? See how good I am?" The self-preservation four seeks to make a virtue out of resistance to frustration. I've often explained it with an anecdote from Lawrence of Arabia, as per the famous film, where he's seen in an office in Cairo lighting a cigarette for someone and then extinguishing the match with his fingers. Someone, surprised, asks, "What are you doing?" And he explains that in this way he trains to endure pain. He had developed from childhood the supposed virtue of stoically enduring pain, and it undoubtedly served him during his feats, earning him the reputation of a great hero. Not even among the Arabs had anyone known to withstand the harshness of the desert in such a way. In the self-preservation four, endurance is a passion, but how to explain it? I believe the key lies in the internalization of greed. Pienso que la clave está en la introyección de la voracidad. Let's just quickly check voracidad. I was a little bit surprised to see greed there. It's kind of like voracious, right? Voracidad is complicated because it merges eating and devouring and appetite. So I think it's a really rich word, and I'm just gonna, for now, not translate it as greed, but as voraciousness. I don't think we have the word veracity. And if we do, it seems too obscure. In the internalize of appetite, voracity, voraciousness. I'm going to, for now, just say voraciousness, and we can come back to it. Let me highlight that as a to-do. The visible envy that presents the sexual four as an aggressive, insistent oral type turns here into a counter-envy directed against oneself, now in the form of a self-demand that is also self-consuming. And that really says a lot there. So before we go deeper into the account by Cristina Nadal, I want to unpack this a little bit. So right before recording, I started to look into tenacity, tenacidad. There are a few interesting things. So tenacidad in Spanish, and you'll see this if you Google it, image search here, you'll see like a chain link. You'll see rope tied together. It actually translates perhaps best to toughness. And in fact, like the Wikipedia article for this in like material science, tenacidad is it's toughness. So in the same way that toughness has a sort of scientific meaning. But toughness is maybe too stripped down in terms of what it evokes. Now, tenacity in English is interesting. For some reason, for me, I had the image when I thought of tenacity of like a dog baring its teeth, like that. And I seem to have just sort of, that seems to be idiosyncratic to me, because I don't see, well, first of all, there's a lot of noise here. I think tenacity is used in a lot of brands. And so Google Images here is really advertisement heavy. But the overwhelming image is actually Sisyphus. It's rolling the stone up the hill. And we talk about tenacity very favorably in English. I think being tenacious is a really strong value that the American system has. It corresponds to grit, perseverance. So determination. So tenacity in English kind of lacks. It communicates the stoicism, but it's a very active kind of stoicism. It's very effortful, and I think that's good. I think we'll want to keep that. But what I like about the Spanish tenacity is there's a tightness there. There's a contraction, toughness. There's a clenching quality to tenacity in the Spanish. And when I examine my own psychology, clenching is going to be very, very important for tenacity. And so it's a strange mix of words, because we want that enduring quality, that suffering quality, that stoicism, that perseverance, that toughness. But we also want some of that clenching, because I think that's going to help us unpack what Naranjo so concisely says here. The key lies in the internalization of voraciousness, which is itself another word that we're going to have to work on. The visible envy that presents the sexual four. So the sexual four is a biter. They bite others. They want to bite the heads off of others. The self-preservation four internalizes that aggressive oral tendency against themselves. We call this counter envy. And when you're biting your own head off, that manifests in the form of a sort of self-consuming self-demand, never satisfied engine, furnace of not ambition exactly, but of it's not enough. You need to do more. You need to take more pain. You need to suffer more. Essentially, it's a demand for suffering. It's an insatiable demand for suffering. It is a masochism, as Naranjo says. So we'll talk more about that mechanic. And again, we'll mention this over and over again, but these keywords are so important because they're shortcuts to the stories that we live by. And the stories that we live by almost invariably take the form of like, I must X or else Y. They are commands that are by design never going to be satisfied, never going to end. And so there always has to be kind of a twisted sort of logic there. And I just love Naranjo's always examining that, right? He's always saying, how do we explain the passion of endurance? It's not enough just to describe endurance. What is the engine there? And so this engine for the tenacious self-preservation 5 is a kind of self-devouring. Okay. Let's get into Christina Nadal's account. The Transformation in the Self-Preservation 4 by Christina Nadal. The envious character is based on undervaluation. It focuses on what doesn't work and what's lacking. It dwells in its own deficiency and develops an intense longing for completeness, which is managed differently according to each subtype. Those who envy always lose in the comparison they make with others, with who they are, what they do, or what others have. Yeah, it's important to underscore that they're always losing in comparison. Even when they're comparing themselves favorably, they lose. They lose in their own self-worth. They lose in their own independence. And so the self-preservation 4 is no exception, but they dwell in their own, they sort of dwell in their own deficiency. Although I think here Nadal is describing all fours. In the self-preservation subtype called tenacious, the passion is effort. As with the other envious subtypes, this individual has internalized the abandoning mother as a way of maintaining contact with her. By internalizing this mother who has not emotionally welcomed the baby, who for various reasons has been rejected or separated from her, they also incorporate a negative view of themselves. In this way, constant devaluation is assured. The superego resulting from this incorporation is, while devaluing, very demanding, especially in this subtype. Therefore, it's essential to confront this demanding character, dismantling it, and taking away the enormous power that the tenacious person continues to give it. It's pretty heavy stuff, as is the way of this book. The internalization of the abandoning mother. So the internal mother almost exists only as a mouth. It's almost this cruel reversal where with the sexual 4, the mouth is the mouth of the baby, the mouth of the demanding child. I want milk, I want milk, I want milk. Remember in that chapter, Naranjo describes the strategy of like the squeakiest wheel gets the grease or the loudest cry gets the milk, right? So that's characteristic of the really both the sexual 4 and the social 4, although in different ways. The social 4 cries for milk and the sexual 4 bites the breast. If this kind of language is odd for you, forgive me, but I'm in company. Melanie Klein, as Naranjo has mentioned before, is the grandmother of object relations vis-a-vis relationship between the child and the breast. Whereas the self-preservation 4 has essentially reversed it. The abandoning mother gets internalized. Now, how do you abandon yourself internally? Well, one of the ways you can do that is by constantly devaluing yourself, constantly rejecting yourself. And one of the forms this rejection takes is actually demanding. Demanding so that one can be disappointed or incompletely fed or find fault or find lack. So there's an internal demand that is designed to reinforce the original abandonment or original rejection. Not fun. The four has a lot of work to do. And so, we're acknowledging that here, and it's not easy being None of this stuff is easy, but the self-preservation 4, there is a lot of wounding and masochism and suffering, very kind of pronounced. And of course, as I do this, I'm moving into my own experience even more directly than I was able to with the sexual 4 and the social 4. And so I'm more in this just by talking about it, and I'm very much in my process. So take it slow. In my therapeutic process, it was crucial to identify the vast greed of my demanding side. So there's greed again, that voraciousness, that devouring. So it was also important to recognize it, disidentify it for, every time it emerged and continues to emerge. It's a long-term task, the result of which is to reduce its virulence while utilizing its intelligence. And this stuff is so delicate because you take something like greed or voraciousness or hunger and look at how subtly different, let's say, the 3 and the 4 and the 5 and the 7 might be. So the 7 is la gula, and we'll publish it later, but I recorded with my 7 friend, Bruno. And the gluttony is the sin of the 7, wanting to eat, devour. But the key word for la gula is, as Naranjo presents it, it's wanting to taste everything without digesting. I think the gut from mouth to anus, from eating to shitting, that whole digestive tract is a very powerful metaphor for all types. And in some ways is not metaphor. Actually, in some ways is the basis of psychology. Or certainly some presentations of psychology. So the 7 wants to taste everything, but they actually almost spit it out. Imagine the feast where you're drinking the wine, taste another. You want, in order to taste everything, you actually can't digest anything. So that's the nature of the 7's voracious appetite. Then comparing that with envy and the greed of the 5. So we're talking about greed here. But the 5's greed is greed around scarcity. And we'll talk about that when we touch on the 5. But scarce resources and a greed informed by a powerful feeling of scarcity. What little I have, I must hold on to. Then compare that to the ambition of the 3, who I think we'll see in some ways the concept self-preservation 4 shows up kind of like a 3 in some context. We'll talk about their unceasing demand for better performance, and in that way they might look like a 3, really hard-working, never satisfied, and 3s have that quality too. But 3s are on a different project than feeding that inner mouth, that inner abandoning mother. It is different. Maybe now is not the best time to talk about why. Maybe it's not a very helpful detour, but just all I want to make known at this moment is how these subtle changes in terms of like how you think about appetite really turn into quite different personalities. So this greed of the demanding side, it was important to recognize it and disidentify it. In this subtype, the yearning and effort to achieve something distant brings the sensation of being able to obtain that wonderful thing that was lost. The tenacious one aims to stop being lacking and free themselves through constant effort, like a little ant, based on significant self-devaluation. An effort that states, I'm going for it no matter what it takes, perpetuating the mad idea that we have come to this world to suffer and endure. Thus they aim to be lovable. I'm going for it no matter what it takes. I'll explore that more. It doesn't quite ring true for my own inner experience. But certainly this necessity of suffering and endurance. And sort of it's my lot to be someone who has to grind in perpetuity. For sure, there's recognition there, along with the nostalgia that's common across all three subtypes of the four, of just recovering something that was lost. They have to overcome the stain, the deficiency, for which they interpret that the mother did not provide what was needed through intense, strained, and tense activity. Often in childhood, the situation was precarious or difficult due to lack or illnesses of parents and or siblings. The motto there is, no matter what it takes, I'll get ahead. Another common motto in this subtype is, life is work, until it becomes work is life. So there's a lack, as there is for all three subtypes, and the story that the self-preserving four lives by is, if I work really hard, maybe one day that lack will be filled, or that loss will be recovered. I recognize that I'm addicted to work, although over the years I've learned to enjoy vacations. Even now I continue to fill the little free time I afford myself. The tension has several sources of nourishment. On the one hand, the self-preservation four is an impulsive person who, besides occasionally exploding in intimate relationships, inhibits themselves to achieve external recognition. In general, they live with anguish and guilt when they lose control, invade, impose, or show signs of passionate admiration or love. The possibility of going overboard, as we will see, will be necessary for their healthy transformation, since their character structure is sustained by high impulse control. These people agree that as children they were repressed in their intensity, spontaneity, joy, naivety, and or talkativeness. On the other hand, much of the tension is fueled by the fact that the effort they make is intended to overcome a deficiency that is at the base of the trait, and that in reality is only imagined. Therefore, this deficiency cannot be resolved with concrete achievements. This is why, while the individual is willing to do whatever it takes to achieve legitimacy, as their devaluing system continues to operate, their accomplishments will never be enough. It won't deny their perceived deficiency, won't save them from their sense of lack, and won't detach them from their attachment to it. So, dense. So we're talking about the tension. And tension is really actually maybe a wonderful keyword, tension. Tension holds the T-E-N, tenacity, tentacle, tension, tendrils, tendency, tender, all mean holding. Tension, I don't think it does enough to describe that perpetual efforting that tenacity does. So it's incomplete, but tension, I loved adding that to the puzzle. And here Nadal is describing at least two sources of fuel for that tension to continue. On the one hand, there is basically I try not to use words like suppression, repression, because I get confused by the difference, but there's holding in. So there's inhibition of the intensity that actually belongs to the four. But they know that what do they know? If I explode, well, then I'll get rejected, right? I mean, then I'll be abandoned or rejected, or we'll just confirm my worst fears about my deficiencies. deep down, I know I'm a very angry person, so therefore I must never be angry, right? But that will occasionally result in blow-ups where I do get very angry, and then I hurt people around me or surprise them, and they say, "Oh my gosh, like you're out of control." So then I only tighten my grip on my self-control. So that's one. That inhibition fuels the tightening, holding in. And then the other source of the tension here that Nadal is talking about is all this effort is never going to get me anywhere, because the effort itself only exists to cure a perceived deficiency that I myself made up. And I think it's really important for the self-preservation 4, to come to terms with the reality that this idea of lack, at least for me, didn't come from my parents, didn't come from external circumstances. My parents loved me, and I was a talented, bright, young child, very social, outgoing. So there was no information anywhere that I was somehow deficient, except a story that I created in order to explain some feeling of abandonment that I had to work with. Pre-verbal, very young. Well, the only way I can explain this abandonment is I must be lacking. But I made that story up. And so no amount of data or external validation is ever going to heal that. And so in that way, the voracious appetite of the demand never ends. And that's the difference in a way between the 4 and the 3. The 3 really does achieve. And I think the 3 recognizes their achievements and celebrates their achievements and then says, what's next? How do we keep this going? Now, they also deal with a form of abandonment with contingent love. And because of the way we're doing this, we'll actually close with the 3. So it'll be a while until we come back to the 3. But the 3 has more of a performance motivation than a filling the hole motivation. In a way, the 4 just wants to heal. The 4 just wants to heal, wants to fill the hole, wants to get to 0. Just desperately doesn't want to feel lacking anymore. For the 3, there's a not enoughness and a performance and a slight whiff of desperation of like, well, maybe I can be this, or what about that? And they are neighbors, so there's a lot of shared energy there, but they are different. And so I think as a result, for instance, the 3 might pursue conventional success. We'll learn more about the self-preservation 4 here in terms of like what success looks like for them, but I would imagine that it's the 3 more than the self-preservation 4 who's able to really actually succeed in conventional ways. And the 4 has maybe more of a neurotic attachment to hard work that's not productive. I think the 3 is very productive. The 3's feedback loops are more sound in terms of like, oh, I'm getting external validation that this is working. But because the 4 is ultimately serving their own inner made up lack, they have fewer markers of being, quote unquote, on the right track. Of course, it's all neuroses, but I guess where we're going is like, I think the 4s can show up more as depressed or melancholic or have despair or run into major addiction issues. So I think 3s are maybe more likely to encounter conventional success through their neurotic fixations. So, to a greater or lesser extent, all that effort that we're talking about can be unproductive. This person expends a lot of energy fearing they won't achieve their goals and raises the bar of demand to counteract this. They waste much energy delaying necessary actions for their aspirations and blaming themselves for it. Whew. They also exhaust themselves seeking and striving where they already know success won't be found. Oh yeah, this is reinforcing what we were just talking about, ensuring the perpetuation of effort and self-devaluation. Starting from the conviction that I won't be effective, I get caught up in the details of an action, whether it's organizing a drawer or writing an article or ensuring I consider every viewpoint, instead of getting to the point in a more functional manner. In this tenacious character system, living well without so much tension and pressure is not feasible. Initially, halting the constant intense activity increases the level of anxiety, as it makes room to feel everything hidden behind the tenacity. One phrase that I've been using in my own work is white knuckling. And I notice how much of my work is done from tenacity, is done from tension. Sometimes I call it the furnace. It's kind of in my belly. It's just sort of this engine. But it's an engine that, as we're discovering with the four, it's an engine that grips and tightens. It's a drawing in. And as unpleasant as that is, it helps one get markers of when you're doing it, when you feel that tightness and that grip. And white knuckles, you know what I mean, right? Like when you're gripping, when you're holding something tightly, your knuckles get white. I do that a lot, and now I'm at the stage of my inner work where I use that as a sign to let go. And not to say necessarily that I shouldn't work, but that the work, it's unproductive at that point. But I think as we're about to see, the extra step of actually not doing anything, not efforting at all, is very difficult for the four. Okay, picking up the self-preservation for wardrobe change and location change. We're out of the Deep South and into the Bay Area. So we're talking about effort and unproductive effort. So to a greater or lesser extent, all that effort can be unproductive. This person expends a lot of energy fearing they won't achieve their goals and raises the bar of demand to counteract this. They waste much energy delaying necessary actions for their aspirations and blaming themselves for it. They also exhaust themselves seeking and striving where they already know success won't be found, ensuring the perpetuation of effort and self-devaluation. Reading this paragraph now, it does clarify a few things for me, because in my relationship in particular, this can be this has been a sort of a challenge for me, which is that I kind of can come off as low energy or just sort of beleaguered or tired. And I wasn't, in terms of the Enneagram, I wasn't quite sure what to make of that. So you have the 5, which we'll get into next, who is very energy conscious. And so I at first I thought to myself, well, that's my 5 wing, right? Kind of like needing to protect and conserve energy. And there is a little bit of that, but I think this reveals something else, which is that I just am expending a lot of energy that isn't necessarily obvious on the outside because of how unproductive it is. So what is Nadal mentioning here? Energy lost fearing, just sort of worrying about not achieving goals, wasting energy delaying action, and then wasting energy blaming themselves, exhausting themselves striving. So this is where Sisyphus and the stone maybe becomes a wonderfully apt image of, like, from the outside perspective, there's no progress. If Sisyphus was an employee at a company and we sort of said, okay, Sisyphus, what'd you get done this week? He'd say, well, still pushing that stone. Gosh, what is he doing? But he actually is working super, super, super hard. So that constitutes that unproductive energy that I think from the outside can be frustrating, a little mystifying. It's like, well, it can even read maybe as laziness, but the 4 is the opposite of lazy. So that's revealing information to me as I read it. Starting from the conviction that I won't be effective, I get caught up in the details of an action, whether it's organizing a drawer or writing an article or ensuring I consider every viewpoint instead of getting to the point in a more functional manner. In this tenacious character system, living well without so much tension and pressure is not feasible. Initially, halting the constant intense activity increases the level of anxiety as it makes room to feel everything hidden behind the tenacity. Yeah, that's kind of that. I don't know what's the sort of hero's journey there, but right, it's like that's the lowest point when you finally release the tension, but it's not relief. The tension is the strategy not to feel everything that's hidden underneath it. Given that tracking anxiety is a good avenue for transformative self-awareness, stopping the tenacious activity will be a good start to the transformation process, although initially it may result in increased anxiety and anger and a deep connection with sorrow. When my husband and I moved to a house that we didn't have to start paying for until after a year, far from Barcelona, and decided to significantly reduce my work to spend more time with him and myself, I went through hellish periods. The internal self-critical dialogues ran rampant, and my demands on him increased too. Accepting suppressed emotions, giving them space and expression, is essential for healing. The therapeutic thing is to feel anger and sadness without exaggerating or justifying them with thoughts that feed them back and prevent their transformation, which comes from simply living and expressing them. Suzanne Stabile has her just wonderfully kind of pithy framing of the Enneagram of thinking, feeling, doing, and the 4 feels stuff, then they think about how they feel, and then they feel more, and they think and they feel, and they think and they feel. That's what Nadal's pointing to here as something that the 4 has to not do in their transformation. It's not feeling this thing and then thinking why am I feeling this? Well, because this person did that, or that person did that, or this is not fair. It's just feeling it and letting the feeling come and being with it and letting it transform on its own, which can take time. My first healing step was the intense catharsis I experienced in the first 2 therapeutic trainings I participated in. It was a blessing that, by the late 70s and early 80s, emotional outbursts were in vogue as a therapeutic method. Even though I needed individual therapy to process the material that emerged from them, they were liberating not only because of the content that surfaced, but also because I could accept myself as intense and vital. Yeah, that's important, and accepting yourself as intense and vital for the self-preservation, for I think connecting with that intensity is the 4 is so clamped down that their intensity is experienced in sort of these rare outbursts, but this is a vital intensity. This is sort of like a heartbeat that's there that the self-preservation 4 has sort of suppressed. At the same time, I had to come to terms with the underlying sadness that no catharsis could drain. I was feeding it by not wanting to know anything about it beyond feeling like a victim and trying to resolve it, for example, through my partner, without taking responsibility for it. Recognizing one's own intensity is paradoxically calming. It's more unsettling not to know it and fear it. Wanting to live a better life is not easy and is even punishable. It's not allowed. It can be mistaken for an ambitious pretense, which is disparaged and feared. In fact, often, as with other envious subtypes, when the conservation type feels good, they quote-unquote go overboard. They inflate narcissistically more than they find satisfaction and self-support. Therefore, when faced with any setback, they deflate the world. So let's take that slow. Let's keep going. We must remember that the effort is made to be saved from the deficiency against which one feels defective. Let's add here that this negative self-image that they try to resolve through effort hides and preserves a grandiose fantasy of oneself. It's a suppressed narcissism fueled by the ability to tolerate pressure and ego-dystonic sensations, and also by the depth of their sensitivity and what might emerge from themselves as fantasized if they could achieve ideal love, an ideal job, or be discovered by someone important. It's transformative to identify and embrace this narcissism hidden behind the negative self-image. For the tenacious one, it's healthy to recognize the pretension and ambition that underlie their attachment to work. Okay, it's an extremely dense paragraph, but a very important one. So, I'm just bringing up the Spanish to compare. So what is Nadal saying here? First of all, she's pointing to this sort of overcorrection, which is that when the self-preservation allows themselves to connect with their potential or the quality of their work or something like that, then they inflate. And that will be common across really any kind of polarization, right? Which is it's like these dramatic swings. But there's more to say specifically about the self-preservation for here. I need to translate this. We must remember that the effort is made to be saved from the deficiency against which one feels defective. That's just a lot. So let's No olvidemos que se esfuerza para ser salvado de la carencia frente a la cual se siente. Unsurprisingly, the Spanish doesn't help me there. It's just a tricky sentence. I'm going to try to translate that sentence. We can't forget that the force strives to be saved. I don't think I made it any better there. Let's add here that this negative self-image that they try to resolve through effort hides and preserves. I don't know if I can go all the way here with Nadal because there's just it's rich and there's richness here that I want to extract, but like ego, dystonic sensations, I don't have the bandwidth to even pursue some of these phrases. But let's see if we can pull out the essence of what she's saying here. And remember, I think pretty much everyone who writes their thing is a psychotherapist. So this is like psychotherapists writing about their own journey. So it's going to be dense. It's not designed to be accessible. I mean, there's an important clue here. So maybe I'll work backwards from this in my own work, which is the clue is that where does this where does the story of being defective come from? Where is the evidence for my defectiveness? Is it in my work? No, I'm a successful entrepreneur. Highly intelligent, capable, hardworking. Is it my parents? No, they never made me feel like I was defective. Is it my social groups? No. I got told once or twice something that really stung, but nothing compared to like what other people might experience in terms of the external world really telling you that you're not enough, not smart enough, not beautiful enough, rich enough, whatever, that is. Nothing like that. And in fact, the stinging itself is a clue. Why did it sting so badly those few times that I got rejected? The tempting answer is because it rang true to me. But I think for the self-preservation 4, the deepest answer is actually that it rings false. But the 4 is not willing to see the falsehood of their perceived self-deficiency, of their lack. Their lack is an invention that they came up with as a very bizarre kind of survival strategy. The fours have the most complicated survival strategy. So from an accessibility perspective, it's really not a great idea to start with the 4, but I'm starting with the 4 because I am a 4 and I want to start, with myself. So I think it stings so bad to deal with that lack because the 4 knows somewhere deep sense they made it up. It's not true. So there's injustice there. So with that in mind, it's important to call in this narcissistic, inflated side, because that's the sliver of self, for at least in my own development, very young, who's kind of in on the lie, in on the survival strategy, who knows deep down that I'm not defective, but hasn't really shown up in the world in a normal way. So it's sort of holding on to, infantile or juvenile possibilities of what I might achieve. Not to say that those are delusional. They're just very inchoate, very raw, very young, underdeveloped. But if the 4 is able to connect with that previously suppressed narcissism, and again, I try to avoid the word narcissism because it's just such a trigger word, but rest assured, every type is vulnerable to narcissism. If the 4 is able to connect with that grandiose self-image, then, as Nadal says, it's transformative to identify and embrace this narcissism hidden behind the negative self-image. It creates the blueprint for unraveling the whole story of lack or lack of lack, or, in the sexual 4, am I better or am I worse? All of that can start to fall apart. From there, she says, it becomes more feasible to question how much they really want what they're chasing. I subtitled my emotional autobiography as Autobiography of a Girl Who, Without Confessing It, Took on the Task of Recovering the Prestige Supposedly Lost by Her Father, Emulating Her Mother's Toughness, and Trying to Be Herself an Erect Phallus. That's quite a title for autobiography. Of a girl who took on the recovery, supposedly lost by her father, emulating her mother's toughness, trying to be herself an erect phallus. This woman is now burdened by the attempt, and she knows that this isn't the only stance she can take in life. It's interesting. That's such a different, and of course, the female 4 versus the male 4, they're going to have different psychologies, obviously, but Well, maybe it's not as different as I initially supposed. Trying to be herself in erect phallus. No, maybe there is kind of an erectness to this social to any self-preservation for. I need to sit with them more. The woman is now burdened by the attempt, and she knows that this isn't the only stance she can take in life. However, she still faces the challenge of letting go of this pretension, which is turned into an obligation, without denying her desire for power, which has finally been unveiled. Okay. Often, especially when the relationship with the mother is more traumatic due to rejection, abuse, and or some mental illness of hers, we see in this Enneagram type an inability to be happy. A prohibition, initially mysterious, that fades as it's confronted and as the pain, anger, and love related to her are worked through. I think it's important, that's a tough thing to admit, but I would say that's true for myself to some extent, an inability to be happy. I have moments of happiness, but the happy resting state is difficult for me for sure. Like with any Enneagram type, we know it's necessary not only to work with the mother figure, but also with the father. Generally, and especially in these situations, it's necessary to allow oneself to be happier than the mother or to achieve more than one's parents, distinguishing this from the rivalry game that keeps a person tied to a deeply entrenched bond. I also had to allow myself to be more socially successful than my parents. Emotionally, it's healing to acknowledge fear and shock at their most natural levels. Even though the type 4 can often express their fears, in reality they are quite daring. Generally, they don't allow themselves to experience fragility. They cover it with tension and action. This doesn't really come up in any of the subtypes of this Naranjo piece, but one thing that I've heard about 4s, I think is true, is 4s love story. 4s love like that layer of abstraction beyond direct experience. And so the 4 might talk about their fears a lot. They might express their fears. They might write poems about their fears or create art about their fears. And yet, going back to unproductive work, none of it seems to quite do the healing. And one could say, in fact, that's part of their strategy, that, again, unproductive effort, tenacity, what you'll see in sort of more generic 4 descriptions is like they really want to be unique and special, which is all true. But, here I think we're getting even further down into it, which is like even that pursuit of uniqueness and specialness is itself just a function of lack and of like creating an endless efforting loop in the case of the self-preservation 4, who is a little bit of a counter type. So maybe self-preservation 4s show up as less artistic than, say, a social or a sexual 4. Vulnerability brings them too close to feelings of abandonment against which they become strong by feeling like victims and resisting whatever comes their way. Feeling vulnerable triggers intense emotional expressions that one needs to navigate through. Yeah. I mean, this is sort of true for all people. I would imagine that vulnerability is hard, right? Because in a way, vulnerability itself is like a bespoke all vulnerability means is the feeling woundable, and every type has their own wound pattern. So vulnerability almost is definitionally the scariest place for any type to be. But I might be particularly like emotionally intense for a 4. On other occasions, touching on vulnerability awakens the fear of depression. Feeling the decrease in tone without justifying it with the fears that the inner critic continues to press with to maintain relentless activity opens up space to, for example, accommodate need, distinguishing it from lack. Yeah, that's big and challenging for the self-preservation 4 is, and for all the 4s really, is to discern the expression of lack from the expression of need or want. Acknowledging the sensation of fatigue will be another good support to recognize one's limit and those of others, to be able to let go of the effort, release control, and drop the neurotic pretension. I learned to recognize fatigue thanks to suffering from pneumonia. What was terrible at the time, being unable to do anything, helped me become aware of fatigue. Given narcissistic support, I'm just going to quickly check. We're in the home stretch. Given the narcissistic support that the type 4 with a self-preservation instinct places on effort, setting boundaries to others' demands without resorting to guilt is a significant step. It means they have value beyond what they do. That's kind of a sneaky, significant point. Being able to say no is a great liberation. Sometimes it's not easy for me, and it requires a lot of self-attention. Currently, as I've acquired and recognized my skills through both internal and external work, as well as with age, saying no means giving up a recognition to which I'm still attached. Might be a little bit of a 3 energy there. In the transformation process of the subtype, their body changes from, and that's so different from the 5, right? The 5 maybe doesn't say no, but is pretty comfortable with resisting and not doing. Self-preservation 4. Because I think the self-preservation 4 can sort of look like a 5 a bit. But there are several sort of key differences here. And one of them is setting boundaries. I think the self-preservation 4 might resist or complain or express grievance, but they're still going to do it because they're terrified of losing the relationship. Ultimately, they're so relational, and they need to be in that. Like all the 4 subtypes, they need to be in some sort of sadomasochistic relationship with the other. In the transformation process of the subtype, their body changes from tense to soft, at least on the inside. It also shifts from being more contracted to be more expansive. Body work, both muscular and expressive, as well as sensory and attention-driven, contributes to this change. The quality of being soft, vulnerable, fluffy has significantly appeared in my feelings and body perception, thank goodness. At first, I was afraid of losing identity, afraid of becoming foolish. Gradually, that fluffiness allows me to accompany myself and feel within my space with the possibility. We're going to have to fix this translation. Esponjosidad, fluffiness. Yeah, gradually that fluffiness allows me to accompany myself and feel inside my space with the possibility of establishing the relationships that occur in those I seek. It's almost like fluffiness is, it's a beautiful, fluffiness is probably, if I could only pick one word from this whole thing that has been powerful for me beyond the keyword of tenacidad, is fluffiness, esponjosidad. It's like it's a completely different paradigm for having relationship without being annihilated. And it's like, think about a pillow or any kind of like soft buffer between two beings, that it's not hard, it's not tough, but it also does protect. It's like kind of fluffy cotton. But in order to establish fluffiness, as she says, one must sort of accompany themselves into their space. It's almost like a sentient protection system, that rather than like a rigid construction. I just want to Google esponjosidad because I'm curious about what that is in Spanish. Oh, sponginess. So I think I've got the camera working, but it's like when you search it, it's all about breads. So we're looking at like that spongy. We would sort of say spongy for bread. But fluffy, you know, I think you can describe biscuits as fluffy, porous, right? So it's like, it's so interesting. Porosity, not from the perspective of the membrane, not from the perspective of the outside, but from the perspective of the inside. There's porousness in the inside so that it allows some compression, but then can restore its shape. So, you know, if you've been with me in this journey, you can see how, for me, my reading of the Enneagram, it's so energetic and so connected to objects and physics in a way. That's kind of the way that a lot of these dynamics come to meaning for me. And it's why etymology is so important, because etymology oftentimes evokes these physical ideas. Sponginess, fluffiness. This change in tone and body posture serves as the foundation for deeper intimacy with oneself, the ability to enjoy, and the capacity to love and love oneself. The transformation of the type 4 involves, little by little, identifying what does work, what's right in themselves and around them, meaning in others and in situations they are immersed in. Specifically for the tenacious ones, it's about approaching to enjoy what's right. Oh. We're almost there, but we're running into such little annoying translation challenges. Let's see. Although I should say, I mean, like, it's just incredible the quality of this translation. This is a mostly unedited translation from an older version of ChatGPT. It seems, I'm a little bit worried that the quality is degraded, but we'll see. What's right in themselves and around them, meaning in others and in situations they emerge. Where were we? Pasa por... Yeah, just, it's about starting. Let's just say starting. De lo que está bien descansado en ello. Not what's right, what's good about themselves. Resting in that. Without intending to improve it. Yeah. It's about starting to enjoy what's good about themselves without intending to improve it, just savoring it and letting oneself be satisfied with it. Remember the vertigo I felt the first times I proposed to focus on what worked well in my life. When I indulged in what I liked about my partner, I noticed the dependency I'd always been phobic of. Regarding my children, relaxing and enjoying them without so much educational pretension has been very rewarding for me and for them too. It took me a long time to rely on the good quality of my work. I mean, it's such beautiful. I know I'm going fast because it's the end, but I mean, just want to read that again. It's such a lovely, I mean, this is why we do the work. I felt the vertigo I felt the first times I proposed to focus on what worked well in my life. I just want to change propose to I resolved to focus on what worked well in my life. When I indulged in what I liked about my partner, I noticed the dependence I'd always been phobic of. Regarding my children, relaxing and enjoying them without so much educational pretension has been rewarding for me and for them too. Took me a long time to rely on the good quality of my work, to savor successes, even without completely silencing the critical voice that points out everything that could be improved. So when she describes silencing the critical voice that points out everything that could be improved, that sounds 3-ish to me. And it's a subtle point, it doesn't matter. And, I trust Nadal's own phenomenological experience. And also, we're human beings, we're not numbers. These are made up. But if you hear a critical voice that points out something that could be improved, maybe it's just my own psychology, but I don't think the four's demanding inner mother is not, it's very inchoate. It's very early. So it's not going to be like, that could have gone better. This, that, next time do this. That to me sounds productive. And that's the 3. The 3 has productive self-criticism. So, if your critical voice is pointing, this could have been better, that could have gone better, this could have gone better, still something to work on and explore. But if you find that it's actually making good points, you may be moving more into the 3 story. Recognizing the good, the beautiful, the satisfying means giving up on achieving what will save us from deficiency, from the stain, from the shortcomings. It means giving up on being as special as the conservation fours feel they are, and giving up on their stronghold, compulsive effort. Stronghold. In the final stretch of my psychoanalysis, I found out that I got more directly to core aspects and contents when I value the positive things in my life rather than dwelling on the negative. Paradoxically, accepting and accommodating dissatisfaction and deficiency enables one to enjoy specific, concrete satisfactions that allow one to feel comfortable with oneself. Ultimately, this path will allow enjoyment beyond concrete results and achievements, as one can give more space to emptiness and no longer needs to save oneself from their negative self-image. This will be one of the biggest transformations. What will be? I guess her point is, the ultimate healing is then allowing all of that dissatisfaction back in as a way to start to get unperturbed by and unmoved by, this is good, this is bad. And that's sort of the equanimity. So the journey, as Beatrice Chestnut describes, is the path from envy to equanimity. I think Naranjo used the same language. Certainly Ichazo did. They no longer need to save themselves from their negative self-image. Yeah, just like that happens, and it's not a problem, right? That's the final elimination of lack. Is even my negative self-image is not a problem to be fixed. Even my negative self-image is not a problem to be fixed, that I need to fix. As a conservation 4 becomes less reliant on their deficiency and becomes more capable of acknowledging their needs and seeking their satisfaction without avoiding frustration, they discover their capacity to love. Affection and love can emerge from within without any pretense other than to enjoy it. They find greater happiness in their love for another than in being loved. They find greater happiness in their love for another than in being loved. This is sort of the reclamation of the self-preservation force core being. Yeah, you do, or at least I do have this fantasy of sort of like, I could be somebody else. I'll finally get all the love that I want and I'll be understood. But even then, there is this felt sense of, but I like loving other people. There is a stoicism. I mean, I don't think I'm going to, but these transformations, as powerful as they are, oftentimes sort of seem to land us in a just truer version of ourselves, where the stoicism, went from an enduring masochistic stoicism into a person who experiences love and enjoyment and acceptance. And there's just there's an unperturbability, just a true solidity and integrity. This loving quality serves as a lubricant to also enjoy the work capacity they've developed throughout their life. It's very satisfying for me to offer others part of what I've learned, although with great anxiety due to the pretension and denied ambition that was behind being the head of a team. I finally learned some coordination skills, which I now enjoy offering in peer work groups. Creativity and art, inherent in all E4s, will be able to serve satisfaction, more stripped of the demand and the need for attention. All 4s have a high capacity for enjoyment, joy, play, and madness. The tenacious one, will be able to open up to it without so much pretension to distance themselves from their deficiency, to gain recognition, or to seek security. They'll be able to enjoy it, nourish themselves with their creative capacity, enjoy that of others. In its healthy maturation, this subtype finds a deep calm based on the development of emotional poise. Deep calm, that's nice, yeah. It's that equanimity. The development of emotional poise provided by the residue of so much endurance. Yeah, that's a beautiful way of putting it. This subtype finds a deep calm based on the development of emotional poise provided by the residue of so much endurance. I mean, it's such a nice sentence that I kind of want to workshop it a little bit, but I think we get the idea. All this, think about Sisyphus, like how much capacity is developed there. And so the result of that is sort of this imperturbability. In this way, equanimity emerges along with the ability to express their vibrant emotional pulses with many subtle tones. All right, so that concludes the Self-Preservation 4 and the 4 entirely. So we're going to move on to the 5 next. And I might do some pull-out videos or some artifacts kind of summarizing the 4 now, because obviously I'm still figuring out how, if at all, one would want to consume this. This is 3 hours just on the 4 alone. So, and really kind of raw material. But if you've made it this far, thanks for joining me. And I'll see you next time when we start to talk about the 5.